Okay, on this edition of the Penn State Blitz, Penn State's got a new defensive line coach. We're going to talk about him. Then we're going to look at all of the staff changes to the Penn State staff in 2020. Matt Limegrover, the former Penn State offensive line coach, has a new home in the Big Ten. And then we're going to conclude with, you guessed it, the Penn State Mailbag. It looks like all of Penn State's coaching vacancies are filled. I'm not completely sure. Greg Pickle, maybe you might have a little bit more of an insight on that. But John Scott has been tabbed by James Franklin to replace Sean Spencer, who took the defensive line coach job with the New York Giants. That's 4 changes by my count, Greg, in a very, very busy offseason. Let's just talk about what we know about John Scott.
Yeah, pretty fascinating hire for James Franklin. Clearly not Penn State's top target. You know, they went after Elijah Robinson, who played at Penn State. I believe you covered him when he was at Penn State.
I did. Thanks for making me feel older.
Sure. A guy that
really appreciate it.
They has really become one of the best defensive line coaches in the country, Bob. He's recruiting very well, too, especially in New Jersey. A place at Penn State's kind of been hit or miss over the last few years. So he was certainly their top target, a guy that, you know, I think that Jimbo Fisher realized he had to keep him on staff at Texas A&M, so they surely backed up some significant money to keep him on campus. Penn State had to move on. With John Scott Jr., I think the most fascinating thing, Bob, is the fact that Brent Pry had a pretty big role in this decision. I don't think there's any question about that, because Brent Pry not only coached John Scott Jr. when they were at Western Carolina, they were also on staff together at Louisiana Lafayette when John Scott Jr. was a graduate assistant. Right. And then Pry was the defensive coordinator at Georgia Southern when John Scott Jr. was the defensive line coach there. So these two have been connected for a pretty long time, and I think that it's just interesting that most of the time when James Franklin finds a new guy, there's someone on his staff connected to them. But I don't know if we've seen somebody this closely connected to a current Penn State coach the way that Scott Jr. is with Brent Pry.
I mean, and since we mentioned Brent Pry, we probably should also throw out the fact that he was a serious candidate for the Michigan State job vacated by longtime Michigan State coach Mark D'Antonio. I think they eventually, I believe, we never know with Michigan State, but as of now, Mel Tucker, the Colorado coach, who wasn't interested, then suddenly became interested again, is now believed to be the new Michigan State coach. But, Greg, it sure sounds like Michigan State took a pretty long look at Brent Pry, who's been up for other jobs too.
Yeah, I think that, you know, Penn State has compensated him well during his time here, and I think certainly more so over the last couple of years as they've worked to up the amount of money they have to spend on not just coordinators, but assistant coaches in general. So, yeah, I don't know how serious of a look Michigan State gave him, seeing that they had a flight planned for State College and then it never ended up making it to State College. So I don't know if Brent Pry just rebuked him or if that was some tactics that Michigan State was employing. But yeah, interesting. I'll be fascinated to see how much money they gave Mel Tucker, because clearly he said no once. And then he went back to they came back to the table, and they must have gave him an amount of money that
the answer
he
is
just
a lot,
could not have said no to. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But to me, Michigan State is going to go through a little bit of a rut here. I just don't see any way around. I mean, they've kind of been in a rut anyway, but it certainly won't hurt Penn State, I don't think, to have one less perennial Big Ten East title contender on that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And also probably worth mentioning before we look at the James Franklin's coaching staff overall with the moves, Brent Pry is now the only coach left over on the assistant side from James's 2014 coaching staff.
That came from Vanderbilt anyway.
Yeah, that came from Vanderbilt. Right. Should we be surprised by that, or is that just the way of the world when you finally get a program that's consistently maybe top 10 or top 50?
Yeah, I think that's just the way it goes. I mean, we've seen some guys leave for promotions. We've seen other guys leave for jobs that they thought were promotions. I'm thinking of Bob Shoop going to Tennessee. And we've seen guys, be let go or fired or whatever when James Franklin felt like a change was, needed to be made. So, I think it's just the way of the world anymore. There's so much money out there to hire coaches with, especially at the Power 5 level. And the 65 teams that make that up, there's 30 to 35 of them that have more money than most of the rest combined. And they are not afraid to go spend money for the kind of guys that James Franklin has identified more often than not to be his assistant coaches. So then you add in the allure of the NFL, which Sean Spencer, of course, was drawn into. And to keep a staff together for a long period of time is just very difficult. And he has kept his defensive staff together for quite some time. Loses Sean Spencer, but, Tim Banks here since 16, Pry here since 14, Smith here since 14.
Right.
And you could argue that that's probably a big reason why that group has been so good for much of the last 6 seasons. Offensively, it did feel like it was time for a reboot. And outside of Tyler Bowen and Jaywan Sider, they have just that.
Okay, so let's look now at the coaching staff in terms of the changes. There's been 4 of them. Kirk Ciarrocca, Redland grad, so he gets points in our book.
Yep.
The Minnesota offensive coordinator last year did a great job with the Gophers, carved up Penn State's defense in that win in November. He becomes Penn State's OC after Ricky Ronnie leaves for the Old Dominion head job. We mentioned John Scott. Phil Troutwine was hired by James, and it wasn't it wasn't like a coach left. He was not brought back. Matt Limegrover, the head line coach on the offensive side since 2016, contract's up. James decides to go in a different direction, so Phil Troutwine coaches the offense, and Taylor Stubblefield replaces Jared Parker.
Yes.
Last year's wide receivers coach, now the OC at West Virginia, Taylor Stubblefield, who played at Purdue, a wideout there, at Miami last year, is now hopefully Penn State's wideouts coach for more than a year because he needs some stability there. When you look at him compared to last year's group, do you think Penn State's kind of made a move ahead in terms of a net gain on the coaching staff?
I think overall it'd be hard to make any other argument that it's not a net gain, at least on paper. We'll see how it actually works out in practice once these guys hit the field in September. But, Kirk Ciarrocca comes in with more of the Joe Moorhead kind of mindset of, I know how to run my system. I'm willing to blend in some of what you do well, but I know what buttons I want to press, and I've done it for a long time with success. With Ricky Ronnie, we talked about it before, but it just always felt like, and I do think he got more blame than he deserved for some of the shortcomings of the offense, but it still felt like he was trying to operate Joe Moorhead's system without the, gut feeling and things like that you need to make that system work. Kirk Ciarrocca brings that with him, so I think that's a step forward. With Phil Troutwine, I think he has more of a sense of how the modern offensive lineman needs to play and needs to be coached. That's not really anything against Matt Limegrover, but we'll talk about him in a second. The fact that he does not move on to an on-field job might tell you all you need to know one way or the other about that move. And then with the other 2 guys, I think the jury's out a little bit more, especially with Stubblefield. Jarrett Parker was only here a year. It's hard to really gauge what Penn State gained or lost there. Stubblefield comes in and you're expecting to gain stability, so I think that's a role. But finally then with John Scott Jr., you're going to have to say that it's at worst a trade, I think, because I don't think you can call him an upgrade over Sean Spencer right now.
Can't do it.
And
I won't do it.
I hesitate to call him a downgrade because we don't know enough about him at this point. And
he's got to prove it, though. I think Sean's reputation. I think that you're right when you say the jury's out on him because, Sean left a very nice legacy at Penn State with player development and recruiting.
So, I would say, I don't know where you're at with that, but to me, overall, it is a net gain heading into the 2020 season, albeit with some pretty important things for at least 2 of the guys to prove.
Yeah, 2 notes. I really think when we listen to James Franklin talk about why Matt Limegrover wasn't retained and why he decided on Phil Troutwine, talked about Phil Troutwine's story, talked about the fact that he's a talented guy but also an overachiever, which speaks to his work ethic. I think he also values him as a recruiter a little bit more than maybe he valued Matt. I think we'll see the next couple of years whether or not they can get some 4- and 5-star offensive linemen in here, whether or not James's decision was justified. And I think in fairness, you talked about Ricky Ronnie getting some criticism that might not have been deserved. It's really not easy to break in as an OC at a top 15 program.
Right.
Joe Moorhead, he came to Penn State, but if you look at his resume, he had a lot of stops before he got to Penn State. Same with Kirk Ciarrocca. I mean, he actually coached Joe Flacco at Delaware. He is a guy that's put his time in. I think maybe James, looking back on it, I don't know if Ricky had some experience, but not really maybe, on the hot seat as an OC at Penn State when you're trying to play Ohio State, Michigan State. And I think that he might be a much better coach down the road. He's going to have to be as a head coach, but I just think that was really a trial by fire, I think, for Ricky, and maybe he just might have not been quite ready for it.
Are we ready for the promo portion of the show?
I've been waiting for at least the last 7 or 8 minutes for your promo. I look forward to it every week, so let's go.
Yeah, the Penn State Blitz podcast. It's available every Thursday. Don't forget, Bob, if you subscribe, you get it early as soon as it comes out.
Bonus.
So keep that in mind. Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe on Apple. Leave us some feedback. And if you're watching the video, we cannot go any further without mentioning the backdrop. And we've returned to our roots as we get ready to move buildings. So I know that there's some folks out there that remember this lovely blue backdrop from the old days. At any rate, you can watch those videos and all the videos from Joe Hermit and everybody else at youtube.com/allpennstate. And don't forget to subscribe there as well.
Let's move this along, though, Greg, and talk about our man, Matt Limegrover, Penn State's offensive line coach from 2016 through 2019. As we talked about it earlier, James did not renew his contract. Went a little while before he landed a new home, but it looks like he's going to be employed by Penn State West, the Michigan Wolverines. So you can stack him on top of their OC Josh Gaddis, another member of James Franklin's staff a couple years back. But he, as you said, he is not in a coaching capacity. Is he an analyst?
Right. So don't forget about good old Bob Shoop is there as well.
Can't forget about Bob Shoop. It
Coach.
is literally Penn State West.
It is, yeah. So
is it Northwest?
Yeah.
Northwest?
Let's
West.
not try and do that.
Okay.
We'll just say West.
West.
Easier. I think it is Northwest.
All right, good.
But we'll come back to that. Maybe
Don't correct me.
Get ready. The mailbag's coming, and some geography will be involved. The reports are that Limegrover's going to Ann Arbor as a senior offense and an analyst. And we've seen every program really kind of follow the Nick Saban model of looking for as big of an analyst department as possible. And the roles that those guys have is pretty undefined.
Right.
But I think what you're always looking for is somebody with a lot of experience who can really dissect tape and break down tape, not just of opponents, but of your own team, and say, okay, this is what we're doing well, this is what we're not doing well, this is how we fix it, and this is how we scheme better. Because let's be honest, a modern assistant coach does all of that, undoubtedly, but the time they spend recruiting is so great at this point in time between electronic communication and everything else that the more sets of eyes you can have when those guys have to do recruiting stuff, the better off you're going to be. So I think Jim Harbaugh looks at it and says, this is a Big Ten guy who's been around for a long time. I think that there were some people who thought maybe Jim Harbaugh hired him to get insight on James Franklin's program. I don't really think that's the case. I just think that he respects Matt Limegrover, who's, again, been around this conference, been around the game a long time, and he thinks that he can help, move that program forward.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think I hate to say it, but Michigan really needs some help, especially I think on the offensive side. I think that the offense really has been lacking. They did some good things late in the season under Josh Gaddis, but they still they can't really match up with Ohio State. They can't score with Ohio State.
Right.
They couldn't score with Penn State, this year. So I'm not sure. I'm like you. I don't really know what Matt's going to be doing, but I think especially on the offensive side, the more experience I think Jim can kind of collect, I think the better, that offense will be. And you're an eagle eye. You had also mentioned to me something about one of the Penn State. Was it a Penn State grad assistant or a Penn State? Somebody joined the Notre Dame staff.
Yeah, so it was one of Penn State's analysts, John McNulty, the former coach at Rutgers. He is now reportedly going to Notre Dame as the tight ends coach, according to The Athletic. He was the tight ends coach at Rutgers. I think he's been at Penn State for maybe a year and a half.
I don't know if I'd put that on my resume, like if I was an assistant coach at Rutgers.
I think that may be part of the reason it took him a little bit of time to find another job. I just
get the white out,
yeah.
Just take a line through it and just say, look, I went walkabout for 2 years.
It was a hiatus.
Just kind of walking around. I was a lot of places. I was never at Rutgers.
Yes, that would not be the worst thing in the world, I wouldn't think.
Okay, I think we're about 3 downs in. Not 3 segments, 3 downs in. 3 doors down. You don't even know who that is. Anyway,
I do.
Let's move along to the Penn State mailbag.
All right, let's do it, Bob. So this week it's a little bit slow in question land because there's just not much going on. But are you impressed that James Franklin was able to dip into the SEC to pry an assistant coach away from not a top-of-the-line SEC program, but one that, obviously has a little bit of money to spend considering it brought Will Muschamp in and has some other high-profile names on staff. So was that impressive to you, or is it just a sign of the times, not only with James Franklin, but the money that Sandy Barber's been willing to spend on assistant coaches?
I think it feels to me like it was an impressive fallback land for James. If we're going on the assumption that he wanted Elijah as his guy, he was 1. Maybe John Scott was 1A, maybe he was 2, but if you look through his resume and you look at some of the people he's coached and developed, to be able to do that, in early February, I think absolutely. Let's put it this way. As we talk about it now, I certainly am a little bit more optimistic about the Scott hire than I am about the Stubblefield hire. I just think that the guy's never really had roots anywhere. Kind of makes you wonder about that. I know he's on record saying no matter what no matter who comes looking for him next year, he wants to stay at Penn State and kind of build a little bit of a brand of his own. We'll see. But as far as John Scott goes, he's got tough shoes to fill. I mean, I know that he's done some nice things, but I mean, trying to follow in Sean Spencer's footsteps, is not going to be easy. Although, Sean Spencer had tough shoes to fill when he essentially replaced Larry Johnson here, and maybe he didn't get quite there because of Larry's length of work, but what he was able to do in 6 years at Penn State and develop guys like Carl Nassib and some other players, I think you really got to tip your cap to Coach Spencer. I'm really going to be fascinated to see what the Giants' defensive line looks like the next couple of years.
Can I get on my soapbox for just a second?
Is it about Bill O'Brien in that playoff game that cost you all that money?
We're not over that completely,
okay.
But you just picked the scab off, so thank you very much. Let's just try and make something hopefully clear for future references. When Penn State has an opening, it doesn't mean they're going to go hire LeVar Arrington or another former player who's never coached before to come in and coach at a top 15 program. We get a lot of questions about that. Just to set the record straight, if you're a top 15 program and you're hiring someone who's never coached at this level before, you better have a good reason. He better have been like a longtime NFL coach who comes to college for the first time, because otherwise you're almost always going to take a step back. So, okay, that wasn't a mailbag question.
How long was that bugging you for? Were you getting some feedback from fans on that? Or
a little bit. There was some
were they
interest
chirping at
and
you?
Curiosity. I wouldn't say chirping, just suggesting that maybe Penn State looks at someone who had played defensive line or played receiver.
Why isn't Tamba Hali the next defensive line coach? Like that?
He actually wasn't one that came up. But
I would have mentioned him. I love Tamba.
Yeah,
one of my favorite players.
And there's some former players who mentor high school players who train, and
I know they
could very well be good coaches, but it's just tough at this point where Penn State is as a program to go get somebody who's never coached or recruited at this level before. So that's all I wanted to say.
I have a Penn State mailbag question for you.
Good.
I saw a prominent ESPN analyst, I think his name's Seth Greenberg, called the Penn State Hoops team. Final Four quality. Now, I know you're a football guy, but I also know you have your ear to the ground, your nose to the ground. No, your ear to the ground. Maybe both to the ground. When it comes to the men's basketball team, Pat Chambers and the players are having a phenomenal season, especially in the Big Ten. Is what Mr. Greenberg said? Do you think? Can you see a scenario where you could see Penn State's hoops in the men's hoops in the Final Four?
I certainly think that at worst they're a Sweet 16 to an Elite 8 caliber team.
Okay.
I mean, they more often than not, they play strong defense. They've proven that now that they can win away from home and at the Bryce Jordan Center, and they've won without some of their best players at times, either sitting out because of foul trouble or illness or what have you. So I think you have to buy in, even though they're 7-0, by the way, since our good buddy Dave Jones declared that he would have to be in Indianapolis Thursday, the Big Ten tournament, to make sure he saw the game that they played. They're now trending towards playing Friday as one of the top 4
Dave's
seeds.
watching.
So
this.
I just want to
Dave's
point
listening
that
and
out.
watching, so he's probably going to get a phone call.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll probably get one anyway. All right, but no, I do think that it's a very good team.
Yeah.
I know that many Penn State basketball fans and those who just follow it casually as football or wrestling fans are probably always waiting for the other shoe to drop because it always has with this program. But man, I'll tell you what, they connect the dots really well in terms of what they need to do to win in a conference that, is arguably one of the best in the country this year. So, yeah, I'll respect his opinion, and certainly if he thinks they're Final Four worthy, they are. But to me, just watching this group, Elite 8, Sweet 16 certainly seem to be in play.
I'm going to hold you to that. Any more mailbag stuff?
Yeah, let's end it with this. You're completing or completed, I'm not sure which, your sort of look at the Lions and winner and the position groups. Now that you're about through that list, the one position group that you were surprised by, maybe that has some work to do that you thought was further ahead, is there one, or you think that Penn State's in good shape across the board?
Well, I wouldn't say surprised. When I look at the spots where Penn State's going to need some players to step up or some young players to develop, even James Franklin said the wideouts. That's the obvious answer. I still think defensive tackle is a concern, and I was not thrilled with the way that the secondary played down the stretch against the pass. I mean, they had some nice moments against the run, but against Minnesota, against Indiana, against Memphis, at times against Ohio State, either missed tackles, not tracking the ball, just too many issues. I know they have some young, talented corners. They like some safeties, but to me, I really think that if the secondary can't play better than they did last year, I just don't know how you're actually gonna challenge a team like Ohio State, even though Ohio State comes to Beaver Stadium, I believe, this year. Secondary for me is, I think they can do it, but I just thought they would be a little bit better, and that's even saying, even though Lamont Wade I thought had a nice year in kind of a breakout, especially against the run, I just thought in coverage they were a little bit lacking, and I think they got to get a lot better.
All right, Bob, it's time for a timeout on the Penn State Blitz. Do you want to do James Franklin's 40-yard dash to get the attention of the official, or should I?
I think you should do it.
All right, we'll be right back.